Mr. Justin. How you doing, sir? Ah, thank you, sir. Gummy bears.
It's time.
It's Christmas time.
It's Christmas time.
What's this? What's this? There's white things in the air.
Oh boy.
What's this? What's this?
I'm so excited. I see people from K, and I see a lot of our regulars showing up. Let's start the broadcast.
Let us start. I'm glad that our very happy regular audience. I have been up since 5 in the morning working in Torrance. I just got off.
I love Torrance.
Just got off
I
shift.
used to live down there, near there.
I did. So did Dirk Diggler. He comes from Torrance.
Really?
Yes.
You know, the house that movie was filmed in is just came up for sale
Boogie Nights?
in the San Gabriel Valley.
Yep.
I feel cheated.
Wes Anderson's little love letter to the San Fernando Valley.
Was
Boogie
it
Nights.
Wes Anderson?
Yeah, it was Wes. Oh, was it Paul Thomas Anderson? Excuse me.
It's
it was
got it.
Paul Thomas Anderson. My mistake.
Wes Anderson would never do Boogie Nights. Hello, everybody.
Hello,
Welcome
everybody.
to the show.
Welcome, everybody. We are
This is-
actually live early. Are we early? We're
No,
early.
we're right on time.
We're actually,
We're-
my
we're
Lord,
right on
help
time.
me.
It's wonderful.
That is why it's so shocking to me.
You're
because
never
it's
on
actually
time.
Well, I arrive precisely when I mean to.
Yeah.
You
If
know,
you're just
it's to
joining
say,
us, look,
cheers, everybody. Cheers. Cheers. Good.
Cheers to you.
Happy Thanksgiving, finally, late.
Yes, we're
Hello,
drinking
everybody.
Perrier because we're fancy hobbits. Hello, everybody. This is Torn Tuesday, your weekly dose of all things Hobbit and Lord of the
Fancy
Rings.
pants hobbits from the East Farthing.
I noticed a lot of people in the Facebook and on Twitter here. Hello, Hobbit Fan Fellowship. A lot of people on Facebook got the notification we were live, and they wanted to see
That's true.
what this
Yes.
is all about. We
Well,
hope this is the greatest thing ever.
That's good.
You know, ask any of our regulars if this is the greatest thing ever. I can't be the judge of that. I don't like the sound of my own voice. But hello, Nicholas Hall, Jose Flores.
Look at these wonderful familiar names and some brand new names that we haven't seen before.
It's
We
so
love that
wonderful.
well, of course, we're still doing this. Jose, we do every Tuesday. And like, we've been doing this for 5 years now. And a
At
lot of
least.
other stuff. And how long have we been doing theonering.net? And I've been writing and contributing to theonering.net, and you have been contributing to live events and convention appearances
And
for
T-shirt designs and
and
everything
T-shirts
like that.
for decades. For decades.
No, only
you know,
15 years.
Only 15 years. That counts as a decade and a half
Ooh.
at least. In Ent time, it's as quick as a flash, as a blink to the Ents. But to us lowly humans, theonering.net is glad to be here. I'm Clifford. This is Justin.
And you are live on Facebook, on Twitter, on Periscope. I see you right there. And
Open up these gummy bears.
what else? Not only Facebook, we've got the YouTube. We're on our YouTube page if you search for the One Ring Net.
How many-
And we're
that's-
on Ustream.
Ustream, YouTube, Twitter Live, Facebook Live, and a live event page at theonering.net. That's
/live.
/live. That's right.
Where you
theonering.net
can see all of our
/live.
social media posts and everything. It's
It's
wonderful.
quite mischievous. Wow, now these gummy bears used to be chewy and gummy. Now they're just like earwax that's day old.
I
Yuck.
think it has been longer, as Kay says.
Day-old
Jose
earwax.
says, "Love that you guys are still doing this.
I was
It's
looking
so
forward to this.
wonderful that you guys are still here watching us. I figure you'd be bored of us by
No,
now."
no, our regular audience is the most faithful. Ye old faithful audience. They wrote a Christmas carol about you. Oh, come, all ye faithful, and come to Torn Tuesday. Welcome to theonering.net, TORN. We actually have a live hotline, and we have a Skype. We're going to share these details with you so that you can interact
They're,
with us.
they're
and,
scrolling right
you
above
know,
our heads.
Bring it, guys. You get
Right
to
there.
interact with us, and we'll take your
You know,
questions.
our phone
and
number
your
right here
mischief.
is 530-64-FRODO.
Frodo.
That's really our phone number. It goes
Yes, it
right
is.
to both of our phones. You can text us. You can call us. We'll open up the Skype lines later, but we appreciate the texts all through the show. 530-64-FRODO.
Hi, Esteban. Good to see you, Esteban. K. Lynn Griffin. Rudolph is on. Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, Hobbit connection to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Can you name the connection?
I cannot.
Rankin and Bass. Animation Studios. They did the stop-motion animation, the same technique used by Leica Studios for Kubo and the Two Strings, and Paranorman, Coraline, and who's that? Yes, that's right. Rankin and Bass did the Hobbit animated cartoon in the 70s, years after they had made a household name for themselves, doing A Year Without a Santa Claus, and the stop-motion animated of Rudolph's Shiny New Year. And there was a little drummer boy. Remember that one?
Yeah.
I love all that stuff. Great stuff, Rankin and Bess. So that is the connection to Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. I'm
We
glad
do
you
this.
mentioned that.
We do this every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific. We talk about all the latest
Yes, we do.
goings on in the world of Tolkien, Middle Earth, the actors. There's so much news for some of the actors that are going on, and this
We extend our conversation to pop culture and fantasy science fiction in broader terms sometimes as well, when we're lucky. Now, what's up? The Dino Gorman thing that showed up on Twitter?
Oh, I don't know about that.
That was fun. It's
Look,
like-
well, today, before we
That
get
was
into
funny.
our pop culture, this is a conversation that we've been wanting to have for a few weeks now, but we needed to collect our
are we going to have that
thoughts.
conversation now? All right, yes.
And
All right.
so today, before we get into the main conversation, today we're going to talk a little bit about the politics of Tolkien and how the Tolkien stories have inspired all different types of groups on the left or the right, the blue and the red and the green. And it's what I found in the last
Indeed.
couple weeks is that every group has embraced Tolkien, and we've seen so many memes
Used a meme.
all over the place, left, right, and green.
Every ideology and every political voice, and there are many voices, I have to say, obviously, to all the international fans who are watching, all the people around the world, they know how strident and difficult our recent electoral process and our election has been for the executive office. And the surprising and to many contentious results have caused a lot of people to use Lord of the Rings and Hobbit characters and situations to help present a prism through popular culture, a meme, to express some of their political ideology. And what is true, Justin, is quite true, that as many voices on right as well as left-leaning ideology have also appropriated Tolkien, when I find that kind of surprising, when the elements that I read in J.R.R. Tolkien, remember The Hobbit was out in the late 30s, 1937, I find like World War I references and easy to spot World War II references when I read The Lord of the Rings, when we're looking at political ideologies. Particularly look at the power struggle with Saruman, who was, in a pinch, supposed to be the leader of the wise and all the wizards.
That's right.
And ended up being corrupted by what Tolkien presented as the flaming eye of Sauron, as a very obvious symbol to many. That symbol is read a certain way. But the Sauron energy, the power of that Maiar spirit corrupting another Maiar spirit. When you look at the Saruman thing and how he got fixated on finding the ring for himself, you'll find a lot of people using fast and loose little political memes during this recent political election featuring Gandalf and Saruman, or Frodo losing the ring, not making it all the way to Mordor, all kinds of references. Oh my God, I've seen, you know what? Even the pundits talking on cable television ended up making references to, Osgiliath.
Really?
Yeah, I heard that. And you shared that clip with me. It was really interesting. There's Lord of the Rings references appear in so many surprising places, Justin. They really do. So I'm glad you brought that up because, it allows us to talk about Professor Tolkien's larger concepts as a literary genius using, applicability, the sense of different characters, different things being applicable to the reader's eyes and with the reader's daily concepts of the history they live in. Professor Tolkien was all about that certain characters and reading of symbols in his stories were going to be applicable to different cultures of people going forward in time, and they would see fit to apply those symbols the way they thought would. As opposed to C.S. Lewis. Tolkien was always arguing with C.S. Lewis about how heavy-handed the Narnia symbolism was. He's like, Jack, Lewis, what are you doing this for, buddy? Come on, give the reader a break.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis responded to Tolkien and said, come on, I'm telling them about the power of Jesus' love and putting that in Aslan and putting very specific Christian imagery in there. And they're going to appreciate Aslan that way. And Professor Tolkien, who is more religious and more of a devout Catholic, and of course Lewis never ended up being Catholic at all. Look at that. Tolkien would rather not be so heavy-handed with his symbology. He didn't like allegorizing so forcefully because he felt he'd rather let the reader make up their own mind.
Right.
How these symbols could be applicable to the reader's individual mindset.
Adam in the
Tolkien's thing.
chat room says, but didn't Tolkien disavow any reference to the world wars in his novels?
Indeed. Specifically, he did. Specifically, he was more interested in avoiding this or that being an allegory. I see them myself. When I read The Lord of the Rings, I see, I know about Professor Tolkien's experience as a soldier in the trenches of World War I.
Mm-hmm.
He was dodging mustard gas, attack bombs from, the Krauts,
Yeah.
from the Germans, So I can see all that stuff in The Lord of the Rings because I know a lot about Professor Tolkien's, real life experiences, and so I see that. But he did disavow literally pushing the allegory. He wanted the reader to make up their own mind.
No, but he saw where it was going. Like any author, that was his first book, and
you write a book about a war saga, and people are going to think that war is about their war.
And you wore your service on your sleeve as he did.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody. I mean, he really, made a point to let everybody know how the horrors of war, influenced his writing. Again, you have to remember there's 30 years or so in between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So Hobbit being his first novel.
No, about 17 or 18 years.
17 or 18
about
years.
17 years.
So
maybe.
that's a long time in between. I mean, it hasn't been 17 years since Rowling finished her Harry Potter, and she's already creating new stories in that world.
Yes.
Tolkien waited 17 years.
He tried to get his publishers to publish the Silmarillion before writing The Lord of the Rings, but they wouldn't take it.
He knew what he was putting in his writing. That's the point. Kay makes a good point. But I wanted to talk about. Look, I've seen memes the last couple weeks of the King of Rohan saying victory. We have victory. Obviously posted by Trump supporters, and then I've seen memes of the same exact carrier. How in his ultimate despair, how can we see light when there's so much death, like so much hate? There is the both sides I see have been using Lord of the Rings memes to bring up how they are feeling and communicate how they are feeling. And this doesn't lean left or right, but I wanted to go back because you wrote and produced the documentary Ringers Low the Fans, which was a case study in the different eras of fandom. I mean, let's go back to post World War II. I mean, what were some of the what do you feel like Tolkien's fandom embraced these stories? I mean, Gandalf for president, Frodo lives. There was this whole thing. When did that Gandalf for president thing start to take off?
In the 60s. That was part of the American counterculture.
Counterculture?
The American counterculture in the 60s was the one that had the Gandalf for president button. That was during the Nixon era. That's right. Remember Frost and Nixon?
Yeah.
Okay, remember Frost interviewing Nixon?
Yep.
Crazy stuff. It's a really good movie, by the way. If you haven't seen Ron Howard's Frost Nixon, check it out. It's a really, really cool movie, and it's a true story as well. And, okay, hey, look. We're getting messages from everybody. It's so good. Our hotline is on 530-64-FRODO. If you want to call, join us, and text us. And there's going to be Skype on. I didn't bring my tablet today.
So Tolkien was still...
We'll Skype you later on.
Tolkien was still alive when the counterculture embraced his stories.
Very much. He was very much the beneficiary of those huge checks that came in from his publisher.
Huge checks.
Yes.
But
yes.
Is there any letters of note or any perspective that Tolkien did not appreciate the hippie generation, the stoner generation, all these free love, drug using hippies co-opting his stories into their political narrative?
Professor Tolkien was not at all fond of the type of drug-using teenage counterculture that embraced his work. He was not he called them my deplorable cultists. He deplored
his fans.
He deplored
his fans.
And he deplored
his biggest
them.
fans.
His biggest fans were
but
something he was so dismayed by the LSD that they were taking. They were tramping through his yard in the middle of the night.
He despised them.
They were peeking in his windows, scaring his wife in the middle of the night. They were climbing over his rose bushes.
Hello,
Yeah,
Esteban.
stalkers.
Great to see you.
There was a bunch of crazy stalkers at the time.
Look,
And he didn't want to handle that. He didn't know how to handle that. He was a stuffy Oxford Don. He didn't want to deal with that.
I know. We've had recent discussions. I have with Tolkien fans saying his stories were meant to represent the liberal left, and it's unfair for the right to co-opt Lord of the Rings memes. Because his stories relate more to left-leaning politics, and I don't believe that, and I don't think that Tolkien would agree with that, and in fact, I would.
Tolkien's politics were more limited to being an anti-industrialist. If anything, that Professor Tolkien's intentions were more Catholic in motivation than they were political in motivation. You find that Professor Tolkien's Catholicism is much more apparent in his work than his politics. I tell you, the only thing that I find really obvious in the pages of Tolkien's books is he was a very anti-industrialist. He didn't like petrol engines. He didn't like the sounds of automobiles coughing up gross brown smog in the country shire where he lived,
like
choking the roads with fumes. And that's why he visualized Isengard, which was once a green, verdant orchard. Beautiful orchards, fruit trees, a bountiful place within the circle of Isengard. And the Tower of Orthanc right in the middle, sitting pretty like a pinnacle. And Professor Tolkien showed how Saruman ravaged it at the instruction of Sauron. But of course, Saruman also wanting to have his own power and his own source to stand against Sauron ultimately because he wanted the ring for himself.
So that sounds like everything the hippies are for. Why do you think there was
that's why
negative...
the Green Party went. Remember that crazy parade that happens in Pasadena? What's it called? The Doodah Parade.
Okay.
Where the Doodah Parade, where they have all crazy, interesting characters and folksy art crafts things at this goofy parade and they celebrate Spam and they have a lot of goofy floats.
But
the Green Party marches in that Doodah Parade in Ringer's Lord of the Fans. We dedicated a whole segment in our documentary to the Green Party embracing Treebeard and embracing the Ents. Yes, it's true, the political party that voted for Jill Stein, not for Hillary Clinton and not for Donald Trump. But those people who are very much in the Green Party, they are in our documentary embracing and dressing up in the parade as these beautiful Treebeard walking and talking Ents. They had actors on stilts.
So why would Tolkien hate this fandom? Why would he despise it?
Professor Tolkien never intended a fandom to take it that way. He didn't realize that a fandom would spring up at the level that would behave that way. He was not even aware that such a thing was possible. In the world he lived in, he wasn't even aware. He was not even aware of the success he was about to have. But, hey, I've seen all kinds of different political parties appropriate Tolkien's characters and images all the time, and they do it. They're still doing it now. I've seen them do it for decades. But further to the question of why Professor Tolkien didn't like these kids, like I said, they were taking LSD and they were sneaking into his windows at night. That was pretty much what colored the general opinion that he had, except for the people who wrote him nice letters. And you know what he did? He would sit down for hours and hours and he would write beautiful letters back to thoughtful...
No Doodah Parade for me,
thoughtful parades. Parade, not what am I saying parade. The thoughtful fans are the ones he was interested in. And Professor Tolkien took the time to answer those people who wrote him letters and asked him very careful, reasoned questions about the worlds of Middle-earth. He was happy to answer them back.
So the question, first off, do we know which way Tolkien leaned politically? Obviously, he was an Oxford teacher.
Not so much.
He was a one-percenter. He was an Oxford teacher. He was high society. He was very intelligent.
According to English...
He lived next to John Lennon, one of the richest men in the country. Come on.
That myth has been debunked. It was a band that loved the Beatles and they were doing a mock-up band. It was one of the early Beatles. It wasn't John Lennon
Tribute
himself.
band?
It was a tribute band.
Okay.
Yes, it was a bunch of kids who worshipped the Beatles, and they were setting up a music festival in their garage
Okay,
dedicated to the Beatles.
got it.
It wasn't really John Lennon himself.
Okay, so
Urban
but
legend.
Still, when you think of
No.
the high society elite,
He was an academic. Paid
academic,
nowhere near what the 1%ers are paid.
hardcore Catholic,
Yeah.
and Catholics would, from my experience, have many of them lean conservative, and because everything that the conservatives stand
They
for
do on social issues.
on social issues. So, is there anything from his notes or from his voting record that would be public? Do we know
Not that I know of.
which way he leaned?
I'm telling you, there's scarce evidence either way.
Mm-hmm.
What's more evident is Tolkien's Catholic profile is more evident in his writings than his political ideas.
Well,
Aside from being, obviously, an anti-industrialist. He really was. I don't know if that says anything about him being, conservative
well,
or not.
Adam says, I don't know about Tolkien's politics, but what comes to mind immediately is he was an environmentalist against the industrialization of Britain to a great extent, and
That's what I'm saying.
that's independent of politics. They're just
Exactly.
people that
As
just
I have
want
said.
that.
Yes, indeed. I agreed 100%.
So I'm having trouble consolidating that, or I can't. What's the word? I'm having trouble reconciling that aspect of him, anti-industrialism, pro-nature.
Yeah.
Yet the fandom starting in the '60s that really grew vocal as pro-Tolkien were the hippies, the people that were connecting with nature, and he was totally like, I don't want any part of that.
The hippies, as much as Eric Cartman on South Park would like to, burn them on a deserted island and get rid of them all, hippies were one of the first youth movements to embrace environmentalism as a serious issue and to publicize it.
Okay.
And to very well publicize it. Not necessarily in the smartest of ways with, public demonstrations of drug use, but still, it has to be noted that for better or for worse, the hippie movement in North America, certainly springing outside of the late 1950s is when the Lord of the Rings hit the mass market, okay? We're talking the beatnik generation in the late 50s, jazz, and the whole Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, that whole cool scene, man, cool, cats in the jazz club. That late 1950s American scene when Elvis Presley was just getting somewhere on the charts, okay? That was when the Lord of the Rings first appeared in popular culture, okay? The 60s picked up and embraced the Lord of the Rings many, many, many years later, like 11 years or 12 years later. Maybe. Just saying. So it was a decade later. So there's not a direct connection to the hippie movement and an automatic synonymization with Tolkien.
So
it happened later.
You can't bucket these different. There's so many facets
That's
of
an interesting
fandom.
thing to say. All right, Harry Potter comes out 10 years.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be interesting if a youth movement embraced Harry Potter 11 years later and claimed all the symbolism and all the characters and motivations? And believe me, Joanne Rowling is well known in her political advocacy of social justice. And there's a lot of social justice issues that are on the ballot, and there's a lot of voters who vote on social justice issues. It exists. It's a real thing. It's what happens in the electorate, and that's
Eravani says
that's why we
it's
look at the way these
interesting-
authors write these stories sometimes.
It's interesting when you read The Two Towers that in the book it says the trolls were the evil mockery of the Ents.
Yeah, an evil mockery of the Ents. The trolls.
That is a completely different perspective than what we saw in the movies. That's alluding to a one-to-one, yin and yang, black versus white, if the Ents and the opposite of Ents are trolls.
Well, not that way. She's talking about the original breeding
Okay.
of the creatures.
Yeah.
That elves were stolen by Morgoth, and they were twisted through years of torture, millennia of torture and dark arts to breed into orcs, right? And that's also what they're saying is that he did with the Ents, that Morgoth also took those Ents,
Mm-hmm.
those earliest of the Entings and the Entwives,
Yeah.
and bred the trolls from the Ents. That is the analogy that Kay's talking about.
Okay.
Okay, just to set the record straight for that. That's deep Silmarillion. Deep cuts. Hashtag Silmarillion.
So
on the
from
One Ring
from
dot
your
net.
from your experience, Tolkien, he was on the front lines. He was on the front lines. He lost all of his friends in the war. From your experience, from your personal experience, what have traumatized PTSD veterans? Which way have they leaned, in general, from your experience? Because from mine, most of them
I
are
don't know.
hard right. If they're vets,
Most of them are John McCain, who isn't that hard right. He's a centrist right.
he also wanted to build that wall.
He's one of the staunchest in the Republican Party, but he's not a far right.
So he's not a far right, but he's definitely
a centrist right.
he's a centrist right. He leans that way.
Even Hillary Clinton has been accurately described as being more hawkish than most of her Democratic counterparts. She's not considered super progressive left. She's considered centrist
left. I agree with you that McCain would be centrist right.
That's why Bernie Sanders stood out in contrast to her, because she wasn't left enough for the Bernie voters.
So it's almost,
right.
but so the question is, from your experience, knowing the veterans that you have known all your life,
they turn out like John McCain. They have an awareness of the modern
So
world.
they're
not constantly living in the past.
So would
I
you
like John McCain. I think he's cool.
Yeah,
I'm a very progressive Democratic voter, but I always liked John McCain, and he's one of those Republicans that I really dig. I mean, I think he's cool.
So would you
he's
imply
been through
that
a lot of hell and back?
Would you imply that Tolkien leaned center right then?
I would. I guess my instincts are telling me that because Professor Tolkien was interested in the preservation of those things that made England uniquely English, okay? And that has a lot to do with the preservation of the English countryside and the British way of doing things. He was a traditionalist, but just because someone is a traditionalist doesn't automatically mean they have to be aligned as a political conservative.
Well,
I'm a traditionalist when it comes to my Christmas celebrations.
Absolutely,
and I don't have a problem with Starbucks coffee cups, and I love Merry Christmas, and I don't need to say Happy Holidays as a PC response.
Why can't Tolkien just be
but
independent?
I'm still a progressive Democrat, but I still like my Merry Christmas the traditional way it always has been.
Why can't Tolkien just be an independent? What? Well, we're gonna get to that because I think it's important.
If anybody wants to investigate and get some really good insights into the political mind of Professor Tolkien, then what I recommend you do is pick up a copy of his letters, all his published letters, where he would write to the fans and explain to them, these are and are not my political ideas in what you see in the War of the Ring, the powers of Gondor versus Sauron and Mordor, and whether this represents political ideology of the Allied powers and the Axis powers on the grand stage of World War II. He didn't mean it that way. Tolkien didn't mean it that way. But look, the environmentalism that the hippies picked up on in the 60s, Tolkien didn't mean it that way, but they picked up on it 11 years later, and they made it so.
It's explicit that he didn't mean it that. It's explicit that he didn't mean it like that. But
his environmentalism is in the books, and it's undoubtedly clear he was an environmentalist.
But I do want to point out that there are recordings from early in his public career, I think it's the famous German recordings that were unearthed recently.
Yeah.
Where he goes to a fan celebration. He speaks basically a fan convention. Mm-hmm. And it was one of his only times because they were asking questions that he didn't like.
Pictures of him publicly drunk. It's one of the only times we've ever seen Professor Tolkien off his guard. As an academic, as a professor, Professor Tolkien visibly tipsy, having a good old time, drinking at this party they had for him. Was it in Bavaria? It was probably in Germany somewhere. Okay, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
So we know that his perspective, his public perspective, changed over the years, where he started, talking with and having a dialogue with fans and fandom. But he saw what fans were reading into his works, and he backed away from it. He didn't do much public speaking, toward the fans after that. And most of what we can imply is through letters on a one-on-one, case-by-case basis. The reason I wanted to figure out which way he might have leaned from early in life all the way through. Again, an Oxford professor, a very intelligent man, a war hero. Not even a war hero. He saw all of his friends die in the war, like all of them.
All of them. Yeah.
So, I mean, this guy, he put his PTSD into the written page.
He did.
And so, from that
You
perspective,
can feel it in the War of the Ring. You can see it when that soldier that is killed, when the Mumakil are ambushed by Faramir and the Rangers of Ithilien. Remember that? And
Hello, Daryl.
And this young man is dead on the ground, and Samwise looks at him and says, I wonder if he would have rather stayed home. I wonder what lies were told to this young soldier. I wonder what fear was put in his mind to have him march so far away from home and wander into this war that wouldn't have ever been his war to embrace at all, except now he's been enlisted in it.
So-
and Sam meditates on seeing a dead foreigner, different complexion, a different ethnicity, and Sam contemplates that. In the movie version, it is vocalized by Faramir himself.
Yes.
The dialogue is internal within Samwise in the book. In the movie version, which very smartly the screenwriters gave that beautiful material, and Tolkien's political ideology about how unnecessary warfare is.
That's a good point. Real Elvish Dope in the chat room says the Nazis thought Tolkien was speaking to them.
Yes.
The hippies thought he was speaking to them.
Yes,
I guess he
that's right.
fits wherever you want him to fit. That's,
Yes, he
that's
fits
the
wherever you
interesting
want him
point.
to fit.
Well, I wanted to.
Indeed.
Wait, I was thinking about this this weekend in preparation for this conversation, and coming from the assumption that he leaned right, centrist right,
I would think so.
and conservative, not knows the strengths and weaknesses and personal tolls of war. If you look at all of his characters, that hippies and green people and all of the very socially conscious fans in the 60s all the way to now, if you look at the characters that they embrace and the part of the story that they embrace, if you look at it from Tolkien's perspective, I was kind of looking at it like, all right, if this guy is like a John McCain, if he's a centrist right, all of the hippie characters, I'll just call them, are very simplistic. Almost, I wouldn't say in a demeaning manner, but a lot of the characters throughout most of their storylines are extremely simplistic. The hobbits, a lot of fans appreciate hobbits in the Shire because they lead a simple life. The trees, the Ents, they don't get involved in wars and matters of peoples of Middle Earth. These, like everybody that the hippies embrace, he wrote as simple creatures. They're just simple creatures.
Like Samwise himself. They're connected to the earth.
And the ones that aren't simple, that are more complex, end up leaving the shores. Frodo and Bilbo, they're more complex than...
But further to the point that they live better lives than anybody else in Middle-earth.
Do they live better? Do
The
they
hobbits,
live simpler?
To Professor Tolkien, the simplicity of their lives makes their lives so much better. The elves live in constant tragedy of the doom of Feanor that is from thousands of years ago still hovering over them. And they're not supposed to be lingering in Middle-earth. They're supposed to go back to Valinor and await a fate that they don't even know what will be for them at the end of time. And they're jealous of mortal men. The elves are so jealous of the fact that mortal men get a new destiny and a new afterlife that the elves don't get to share in because they're different from men. And they're filled with tragedy. The dwarves are always filled with tragedy. All of their histories are filled with tragedy. Look at Thorin and the end of the line of Durin. Look at what happened in Moria time after time. It's such a mess. So everybody except the hobbits seem to have it's really hard to find a happy ending in Middle-earth. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
unless you're a hobbit. Hobbits get more happy endings per capita than any other race. Just saying. So is there a problem with I'm not sure how loose you're going with this comparison.
No,
that,
I'm
that
just trying to say.
that
I'm just trying to
environmental
say.
peoples are depicted simplistically.
Yes.
Well,
He wrote them as simpletons.
but not as an afterthought that they would be an environmentalist symbol. He wrote the hobbits to be simple for other purposes. Way other purposes. Not to be part of them being embraced
Yeah, but
as a
you can.
statement
But
of
you.
environmentalism.
But you can. Anyone that's lived on a farm and knows the entire life of a shire, what a shire folk would be.
Yeah.
Some of the hardest living and most complex is living on a farm, being farm to table. That simple life
Yeah, farm to table.
is often as complex as any machinery and progressive what you call it. But what I'm saying is he could have written that complexity.
Yeah.
He could have written that complexity when, all through The Hobbit, which was a book about the hobbits, and then the first third of the first book of Fellowship of the Ring is all about hobbit life and the Shire. He could have written some of that simplicity, but he makes a point to really bring home the fact that these are simple creatures that just enjoy a good brew and a good smoke, But their lives are hard.
Yeah.
They're not wealthy. They don't travel, but they're content where they are.
Mm.
But that farm life is very hard, and he could have written some of that complexity into it. He didn't, and I think because he was a war veteran and he saw the mechanization. World War I was the changing of war.
Yes, it was.
In the
It was
world.
the first time
It was
that
the
kind of warfare was mechanized.
Yeah, so he
And it
saw
was
that.
freaking horrible.
And
It was the worst.
He saw it happening.
Yeah.
He was involved in it. He knew.
Yeah.
He knew what was going
He was
on.
dodging
And so,
the Krauts, dropping bombs on him. Yeah.
so why
Trying to
wouldn't-
run messages back and forth through the trenches.
So if we want to figure out who these stories are meant for, besides the original he wanted to just build a myth for England, is that he's coming from the perspective of a right centrist who looks at the agrarian lifestyle as simpletons.
That's an oversimplification.
Okay.
And I don't get your point.
I'm saying that's why he rejected all the hippies embracing it, and so all of the fans now that are using Lord of the Rings memes to support their left agenda is inappropriate.
He rejected the youth culture of the '60s because he wanted to be a respected author. He wanted to be a genuinely respected author by those literati and all those people in the world of publishing and academia. He didn't want to be embraced by a bunch of LSD using kids, and that's what dismayed him so much. He thought that would destroy his credibility for what he wanted his stories to mean. I'm not going to buy the idea that representing an agrarian culture like the Hobbits was for the sake of letting them just be simpletons and to be the butt joke of all of Middle Earth as the dumbest ones of all. I think that the Hobbits need to live that agrarian life because Tolkien valued the agrarian life. He really valued it, and he felt that if it disappeared, you didn't read the book. But you remember in the book, doesn't happen in the films, Saruman and Wormtongue go all the way back to the Shire with a bunch of thugs and ruffians, and they take over, and they institute martial law.
Okay.
And it's called the Scouring of the Shire. And by the time Frodo, Sam, and Merry and Pippin say goodbye to Gandalf and Elrond, half-elven, and say goodbye to Galadriel, they get all the way back home and realize that their home is being destroyed by Saruman.
Mm-hmm.
He's torn down the old mill. He's burned buildings. He's destroyed trees and crops. He's had tall, full-grown mortal men come and cower the hobbits and institute martial law and a mafia type of control. He assumes a nickname, Sharky. Nobody in the Shire, none of his thugs and none of his operatives call him Saruman. They call him Sharky. You're going to have to obey curfew or you're going straight into the shackles in prison because those are Sharky's orders.
So that wasn't just a dream like we saw in the movie.
It's the most important chapter in Tolkien's story to reinforce something you might not be fully aware of, the nuance of the story of why the hobbits need to have a simple agrarian life is completely reinforced by that chapter, The Scouring of the Shire, when Saruman brings war and machinery and burning to destroy, like he destroyed Isengard. And Saruman brings that right to Bag End. And the whole death scene that happens in the extended edition of the Return of the King movie, it doesn't happen where Saruman gets stabbed by Wormtongue on top of the Tower of Orthanc. It happens on the doorstep of Bag End, and Saruman's blood on the doormat of the Baggins family home. That's when shit got real in The Lord of the Rings. And you haven't read that chapter. So I'm just saying, I'm reminding everybody about the Scouring of the Shire, okay? So because it provides us a deeper understanding of what the threat was. Tolkien was saying if you ignore the war, and he was telling the hobbits, you can't live in a bubble and ignore the rest of the outside world, because war will come right to your front door if you stay and live in a pretend vacuum. And that
war will come to your front door
if you ignore the rest of the world going by. So
and
he was making a statement against their isolationist policies. Isolationist policies that the hobbits lived with regularly for centuries in the Shire.
So
and they were happy to be isolationist. But Tolkien warns the reader by bringing the threat of war right to the front door of Bag End.
If you do nothing...
I wish Peter Jackson had filmed that. I really wish he'd filmed it. But already The Return of the King had 5 or 6 false endings anyways. Sorry.
There's been a couple comments in the chat rooms. Again, thank you for joining us. We're on Periscope, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook Live,
yes,
and we're at theonering.net/live, which is on Ustream, and we're also on YouTube.
And we're eating gummy bears.
Gummy bears. Mini Bjorns.
Mini Bjorns. Mini Bjorns. That's funny.
So if you say, I appreciate that you just said that he wanted to reinforce the fact that if you do nothing, war will show up at your door.
Absolutely. Even Aragorn has that language to Theoden.
So,
war is upon you, whether you like it or not.
So if I'm coming from the perspective of Tolkien himself being center right, then that makes sense that the right wing of current political landscape would embrace Tolkien's narrative, because they basically ran on the same thing. If you don't stop ignoring what's going on, everything's going to take over. If and that's partially what Trump was kind of reinforcing. Although he wasn't calling it war, he was calling it every other social issue. If you do nothing, if you keep letting things happen, it's just going to replace your life. That's kind of what he ran into. So from that perspective, the Scouring of the Shire reinforces a right-wing perspective.
Does it? That war will come to your door?
Yeah.
Well, maybe is that a right-wing perspective?
And so
maybe it's Professor Tolkien's perspective.
This explains why. If that is his perspective, it explains why Tolkien disapproves of the left, of the hippies in the 60s, and every left-leaning fan group. It explains why he rejects that notion, and he rejects their embracing of his stories.
You're taking a bit of liberty with that, Justin. You might be taking a bit of liberty with that idea. Professor Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings while the Germans were bombing the shit out of London.
I agree. Tolkien was not allegorical. First
he was not allegorical.
No. There's not a one-to-one.
Thank you, Chad.
Between actual battle.
I said that about 45 minutes ago. I'm trying to tell him.
Yeah. Okay.
He's not allegorical. He was into applicability, not allegory, whatever. He was into applicability, and he meant that very specifically. Look, Professor Tolkien was aware of all these people being bombed by the Germans when he was in the middle of writing the first drafts of The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
So of course he would have that message that you find in The Scouring of the Shire. It was true to his personal experience. And remember, the Pevensie children, who end up in that magic wardrobe and going to Narnia, they were removed from their parents' buildings that were bombed to bits by the Germans, and those kids were struggling to survive in London. They were relocated to the safety of Oxford to live in the Oxford countryside with their crazy uncle who had a magic wardrobe in the back of the house.
Okay.
Their crazy uncle happened to be C.S. Lewis himself, Tolkien's best friend, also himself as an Oxford professor. So, that's all World War II. I'm sure, I feel it, even though Professor Tolkien disavowed it, I still see that there are elements of what was really happening and what Tolkien was cognizant of reading the daily paper over his morning breakfast every day, looking at the Germans bombing the hell out of London, and him thinking the war is coming right to us, right to our very doorstep. They've come across the English Channel, they're bombing the hell out of London. What are we going to do? I'm sure somewhere along the line that must have influenced his state of mind while writing about the War of the Ring. I can just imagine, It would for me too.
Is there any
Current events, right?
You studied a Tolkien fandom through the ages. Is there any information or any example of conservative leaning or right leaning fandom embracing publicly Tolkien stories? Because people like to lump, because the counterculture was such a moment in time. In fact, it was only 2 years or 3 years long, right? But is there any example of
neo-Nazi skinheads have embraced Tolkien for years.
Really? Why? In what capacity?
Because his stories are so Eurocentric, and he thinks that they have wildly misappropriated his stories to be in support of Aryan nationalism.
In what capacity?
The Third Reich and the Nazi Party also embraced Tolkien and his images in The Hobbit as being anti-Europe and pro-Germanic. And they thought that Tolkien, because of his surname, they thought his last name indicated his German ancestry. And the German the German publishers asked him to prove that he wasn't Jewish and that, can you prove this is your German ancestry? And boy, did he have a retort for that.
Is that in the letters?
Yeah, it's all in Tolkien's letters. Fascinating details about Professor Tolkien's life in the published letters and in his biography by Humphrey Carpenter. It's a good book. Yeah, so how about that? You guys are great. You're a great co-host. This is an invigorating conversation. And it's getting warm in this studio, isn't it? It's getting really warm in here.
It is.
Hey.
That's what happens when you bring politics into Tolkien. So
yeah, that's right.
Is that there's got to be other examples of right-leaning. Go ahead.
The Hobbit race has a lot in common with the race described at the beginning of George MacDonald Lilith. You know what? Interesting point, Nathan. I am not familiar with George MacDonald's work.
So there's got to be other examples, because that's the extreme. Someone brought that up in the chat. The Nazis embraced Tolkien. You're saying white supremacists and skinheads. Are there other examples of right-leaning groups embracing Tolkien's messages and themes?
Probably the death metal movement. A lot of Nordic death metal bands have embraced Professor Tolkien's Angerthas, the dwarven runes, and his characters and dragons, Glaurung and
metal?
dwarves. Yeah, death metal has, but that's not necessarily, to be associated with a political movement. That's a whole different thing.
So,
and I do love.
Do you think if
Metalocalypse? That's a fun show. Our friend works on that show, Metalocalypse.
Do you think if while Tolkien was alive, that the fan groups that he interacted with and the fan groups that became popular culture, were right-leaning than left-leaning, do you think Tolkien would have embraced that more than he rejected the left-leaning fans while he was still alive?
The hippies were concerned with public display of outrageous behavior, nudity, sexuality, and drug use, that Professor Tolkien was so Catholic, he couldn't deal with that stuff. He couldn't deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Free love, man. Free love. Let's go to the love inn together.
Yeah.
He couldn't deal with that. It wasn't political.
Henrik was asking,
really don't think it was
is there a
political.
book of all his letters that you can buy?
There you go, Dallas. Yeah. Dallas has just provided the link. Hey, that's our buddy. I'm going to give a shout out to Dallas Barnett, a very talented actor and performer. Living in New Zealand, you see him in The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. There's Hannah and Iravandi. They're having a lively debate. The fans in our chat room having a very lively debate.
I always thought that...
Are there other examples you were asking me a moment ago about other things that seem to suggest that Professor Tolkien would have... If Professor Tolkien had a youth movement that was all Mormons?
Conservative, yes.
No, Mormons aren't even Catholic. He might be just as pissed off that they were Mormons. That's what I'm saying. Not conservative, just different from his very Catholic ideas. You see what I mean? There are people who didn't want Romney in the race for presidential office because he was Mormon. How about John F. Kennedy? How much hassle did the Kennedys get because he was
a Catholic? Our president's going to report to Rome.
Our president's going to report to the Pope now, and it caused that political conversation to the extreme.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, highly recommended to see Natalie Portman in the new movie about Jackie Onassis Kennedy and how she dealt with the assassination of her loving husband and how she reacted to the world and showed her grace and her power. One of the best things I've ever seen from Natalie Portman. Stunning film.
Hi, Karen.
Really good film. Really, really interesting the way they directed it. Love it. It's called Jackie.
Yeah.
And guess what? My prediction, she gets her Oscar. Natalie Portman gets her Oscar this year. It's amazeballs.
Really? It's that good?
It's amazeballs. It's awesome. And she's in every frame. She's in every shot. And it's a great bit of directing. It's a really good film. Anyways,
Brittany, thank you. Yes. We
thank you, Brittany.
We don't really do politics, but the reason that we're doing a show today, and it's taken 2 or 3 weeks to kind of put this together to gather
let's
our thoughts.
Recontextualize. There's a reason why we have to talk about this, because everybody in the pop culture stratosphere across the country that just went through a really tough election, they're all using Lord of the Rings memes to represent democratic ideals and hardcore Republican ideals.
Yeah, left and right. We're seeing the same characters being used for both sides.
And you can't ignore it. We just can't ignore it. And it's interesting that pop culture is so conveniently appropriated by all of us now to reflect our ideas and our slant on things. I find that fascinating, actually.
And the interesting...
Ellen Design says, nope, the dwarves are not necessarily white, but there is quite a disparity between the ultra-white, blonde-hair-skinned elves and the very dark-skinned orcs. It's symbolic, but white supremacists look at the skin color equation as morality, literally. I don't believe it's all that... No, Ellen, I'm with you on that. She says, I don't believe at all that that's what Tolkien meant. You're right, that is their pernicious view of that, and I can absolutely voice my disapproval because it's my damn show. My disapproval of Aryan nationalists using Tolkien's Riders of Rohan as a symbol of and he wanted to just introduce the element of Great Britain's Saxon warriors of old.
And the fact...
Not to be an Aryan statement, but they've misappropriated it left and right.
I haven't seen much of it, but in your research, because you've done books and movies...
I wrote some serious articles on theonering.net about Tolkien being charged as a racist because of his representation of swarty-eyed dark-skinned peoples, being portrayed as villains against the noble white folks who are trying to win the day.
Oh yeah,
them.
the last.
That's an unfortunate charge.
The
of
last
racism
stand of the last stand of men and elves. I mean, here's the blonde, blue-eyed elves, Aryans come in
Right.
to save the day. It's
Yeah.
I can see what, and this is why there are very few people that can have this conversation. This is why we don't have this politics conversation ever.
Not usually. No.
But we've just seen so many of these memes being co-opted on the left and right, and I wanted to find out from you because you've done such research and you've published books. You're in the official Tolkien library up in Illinois, and you've done the movies. That you've gone into that world and you've seen it and you've read all the letters and the response that Tolkien had to this co-optment. The interesting thing I have is that I've gotten into several discussions.
He lived long enough to see many completely polarized political encampments embrace his work.
Yeah.
He lived long enough to see all that.
But the interesting thing is that a lot of people, maybe it's just the bubble we have here in California, but a lot of people say how, they see these memes that the right is using and they're like, hey, that's not fair. That's our story. And I'm kind of like, you know what? No, because when left-leaning liberal hippies in the 60s co-opted Tolkien himself was, no, I don't want any part of that. These stories have nothing to do with the hippies. And free love and embrace nature and take drugs. Like, he wanted nothing about that. So the purpose of this conversation today was to find out, is Tolkien ultimately universal? Can every side, far left, all the way to far right, both can all of them see something of themselves in his stories?
They have.
And how did he
They have. And that's why his stories have endured across many generations of people, both Republicans and Democrats alike. His stories
what is it that Tolkien
transcended political conversation.
What did Tolkien do
let's
that
talk about
allowed that?
What did Tolkien do? Well,
what is unique about Tolkien that allows...
He set his stories on a mythic scale. Okay, Star Wars is appreciated and loved by right-wingers and left-wingers alike, just as Tolkien is.
Don't point at me.
Don't point at... You grew up in Lancaster.
Just because I'm on the right side of the screen or the right side of the camera.
You grew up in a county of California that traditionally votes red. You know it. Don't be shy. Hey, I'm just saying.
Adam says Tolkien was all about the symbolism of the light versus the dark.
Thank you, Adam,
I'm
for pointing
not
that
sure
out.
that his extending it to skin color was just a further use of that symbolism. Instead, not a statement of race.
Professor Tolkien, hey there, Tiffany.
Oh,
it's so good to see you. There's Tiffany. Yes.
I just missed Tiffany Broadway.
Oh, that's so funny. Hello, Tiffany. It's good to see you. The thing is, Professor Tolkien transcends political conversation because he set the drapery, the framework, and the composition of his story in a time and in a place that isn't politicized. It is mythical. It's mythic. And he felt that in his own land, England, England lacked its own natural mythology.
Okay.
And he wouldn't accept the King Arthur stories as England's great mythology because those were French. The stories of La Morte d'Arthur were essentially French, not English. And that's why he rejected them. So he took it upon himself as a greater ambition to create a mythology. And guess what? The way that we respond to mythologies like Odin and Thor and Loki, the Norse mythologies, the way that we talk about, Aphrodite and Zeus and
Bye, Ellen.
and Hera, bye, Ellen. The way we talk about mythologies, even the new ones like Star Wars, they transcend politics, even though there's some real specific Nazi imagery in Star Wars where the stormtroopers are concerned. Even their name, even the name of those soldiers, they are called stormtroopers. That comes from Nazi Germany. So, I mean, we respond
and
to...
they are white. The bad guys are white. They're literally stormtrooper white.
Well, yeah, hey, even...
The faceless enemy.
How about the First Order in the new The Force Awakens?
Yeah.
There's not a dark person of color, not a dark skin to be seen in the crowds. They're all white.
But it isn't
funny.
the main stormtrooper that turns good is black.
Funny, yeah, you didn't know that, but because that breaks away from the clone ideology that they were all Jango Fett clones.
Yeah, I don't understand why Star Wars. They got to reconcile that
They've
clone.
got to reconcile that all
And
the
I hope
stormtroopers were all Jango Fett.
I hope they do that in Rogue One.
And he is Maori. He's New Zealander.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's Pacific Islander. How about that? All stormtroopers were not white. They were all Pacific Islander. How about that? Did you think about that?
It's interesting.
They were all Jango Fett.
Yeah.
Until we ended up with recruits that were raised from being babies. They do have a weird background to explain on how baby, what's his name, from The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
He doesn't even have a name until
No. Kylo.
No. Wait. Poe Dameron gives him a name. Poe Dameron gives him a name. What's his name? Finn. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Finn. Anyways, so Finn doesn't even know the story of, and doesn't tell us about how he was raised as a baby to be a stormtrooper.
Right.
And was programmed with that. We don't even know. It's referred to by Captain Phasma. Captain Phasma briefly refers to it.
So back to Lord of the Rings.
Anyways,
it's
Star
interesting
Wars,
you
blah.
brought it's funny how race comes into the conversation of politics.
Does it?
Almost every time. And we talked about that. I thought it was just a movie thing, because I remember hearing about people saying that Tolkien's orcs are all dark and black, and all the good guys are white men and white elves and white hobbitses and white wizards, and and all the trolls, and Mordor's dark and everything like that, and you can't blame it on Mordor is ashy and stuff like that. Is there any? How did Tolkien respond to that? Are there letters where he responds to that connotation of the bad guys were all black?
No.
Okay.
There is not. Not that I ever recalled. No.
So how did Tolkien respond to these allegations of not the German Nazis and the Third Reich embracing his stories?
Well, he was kind of amused that the German press got the symbols. They took the symbology of Smaug, being pro-German,
Mm-hmm.
and the dwarves trying to take Smaug's gold away, and they thought that it was something like that. Professor Tolkien realized and joked with his publisher about the Germans having totally misunderstood his intentions. But when they challenged his lineage, he wrote a real nasty letter that said, "I'm not going to say a damn thing to prove that I'm not Jewish, and I'm not going to prove my German ancestry, if you mean by that my proper Aryan ancestry." He's like, "I've got lots of Jewish friends, and I love their work, and I respect them, so you back off." And that was Tolkien's response to them.
But we saw some
that
of
was
these
really intriguing that he took that strong of a view.
But didn't we see some of these 50 years later, 60 years later, after Nazis?
He described Hitler's pernicious race doctrine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we started to see that when the Lord of the Rings came out in 2002, 2003 on our message boards and in the chat rooms. There were people that, either trolls would come in to start race baiting, or someone wanted to have intelligent conversation around why are all the orcs black?
Well,
and why do they speak with the Cockney accent and stuff like that rather than speaking with good English? I mean, these were conversations that fans started to have after the movies came out. And it's interesting that they deviated from that when The Hobbit came out, and instead of giving them what's considered to be a lower class accent, they just gave them orc language. Do you think that Peter Jackson's decision of The Hobbit was influenced by the negative reaction to all of these discussions that came out when Lord of the Rings came out?
You mean the fact that The Hobbit actually has people of color in the background shots?
And
of
the
Lake Town?
fact that the Hobbit does
For
not
the first
use
time? For the first time?
yeah, and the fact that the Hobbit orcs do not use lower class speech,
Yeah, that was an interesting point
And-
of differentiation.
and they're
I
both
wonder-
white, and they're led by white orcs.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It's an interesting idea.
Because there was so
But-
much reaction.
There's an obvious explanation as to why Professor Tolkien's stories are Eurocentric. Because they are. They're set as a false history, an ancient history of Europe. And if you overlay the map, just take the map of Middle Earth and overlay it, then it's England, where the Shire is,
Oh yeah,
and everything going outward to the south
yeah.
and to the
Oh
east
totally.
moves across the European continent, both in geography and climate and culture,
Yep.
temperature. Everything changes according to a Northern European mode of overlay.
Yeah.
So the very nature of where he sets all of his stories happens to be everyone is a Northern European. That just happens to be where it's all set.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Professor Tolkien was not a Northern European by birth. He was born in South Africa. Now, it's also just as likely that if he didn't move, if his mama didn't move the two boys, Hillary and Ronald, the two boys, Tolkien, when they were just 3 years old, if she decided to stay in South Africa and he grew up there, Justin, it's just as likely that Middle Earth would have been geographically overlaid and written over South Africa, extending up to the north.
Yes.
And the people in those stories would have been, different races.
I believe
It's
it.
just as possible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, really, that's the most academic explanation, but I really think that's why. And that's why I think that the charge of racism does not stick against Tolkien.
It never
Because
has.
It never has, because he's just naturally set the stage to tell a mythology for England based upon Northern European languages that inspired all the invented languages that he began with. And so it's all about Nordic, Icelandic Eddas and the Nordic powerful sagas. It's all about that tradition in writing history. Hey, I mean, Beowulf has nothing but white people in it. It is the oldest story in the English language. Beowulf. Go to Japan. And what is the oldest story in the Japanese language? The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter. Well, guess what? When you do a big fantasy epic film about the tale of the bamboo cutter, and there have been many, including the Tale of the Princess Kaguya, which was stunningly done by Studio Ghibli, animated by Takahata.
I don't know how you always do this.
Everybody in the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter is going to be Japanese.
Yeah.
So you're going to tell me there's a racist charge that, the oldest stories are not allowed to be ethnocentric? I'm sorry, but according to the study of language, and we all know this, the oldest storytelling and poetry and songs that we have in any language on earth has to be, by its very nature, ethnocentric, because
Yeah.
that's where languages came from. It's just the way it is in the world. So I find it interesting that Professor Tolkien is primarily motivated by languages and the placement of his languages in an appropriate history. And that's why his stories are as white as they are.
Yeah.
Because he was fascinated by those languages that his ancestors spoke. And that's about it. That's about the extent of it.
Brittany says, if I remember correctly, the map of Hobbiton is based on Oxford. I believe that's
Yes.
true.
There's a bit of influence in Oxford as well.
Yeah.
You find a lot of Oxford influence in the Amber Spyglass and the Golden Compass, written by Pullman.
Yep.
Because he grew up and wrote those stories in Oxford.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are set in the exact same buildings where C.S. Lewis and Professor Tolkien lived and wrote. Yeah.
Well, just to wrapping up the conversation, because there is, again, there isn't a lot to talk about with politics and Tolkien. That's why we've only, in all these years, we've only done this once.
Yeah.
And it's because so many people on both sides are using memes, and then they're accusing each other of, like, you have no right to use those memes.
Funny.
And the fact is, and you have no right to use that character because that character represents a liberal view, or that character represents a conservative view. And the fact is that if you actually look through all of the story arcs of all the characters, you can't really tell. There are very few characters that you can really say, man, that guy's definitely a Democrat. Like they all have major decisions to make throughout the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit.
Yeah.
And almost all of Tolkien's characters are politically like not conforming to any specific thing. I mean, even Bilbo.
Yeah.
You know, everyone else in the Shire lives an agrarian lifestyle, and here's this rich guy sitting on top of a hill who doesn't work a day in his life. You know,
Who learned his letters.
Who learned his letters, and then when he leaves and comes back and tries to reincorporate into life, he says, you know what, this world isn't for me. I gotta go and hang out with the more complex people offshore.
Yeah, okay, I get that.
So there are. That's why when people say you're not allowed to use a Bilbo or a Frodo meme, because that character represents our liberal view, or our thing, or vice versa. You can't use that because that character represents our conservative view. I think Tolkien was so powerful in his writing, and he knew how to write every character straight down the middle and give each character motivations and challenges that don't lean politically left or right. And so that's why based on everything that you've been saying, you're right. Like, everybody can identify. The Bernie Bros all the way to the Nazis have identified with Tolkien and embraced his characters and his story. And no one character represents any one side.
And that says something about the effectiveness, at that really amazing quality, the effectiveness of Tolkien, not hammering the symbolism over the reader's head the way that C.S. Lewis did with the Chronicles of Narnia, where the symbolism is deliberate, allegorical, and it's thrown in your face. And that takes all the power away from the reader. That's how Professor Tolkien felt about it. He thought he would rather his stories have the quality of applicability that could be applied to anybody's constant comparison to their existing world. And he said that gives the power back to the reader and lets the reader make up their mind about what these villains and characters are actually fighting for, what they politically stand for. It was a great testament to him being much more universal in the scope of his writing, that other people, no matter how wildly disparate they are, they still embrace Tolkien and appropriate his characters and things. It's very interesting.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yes, it has been. Very intellectually invigorating conversation.
Yes. One question from Strider Ingram. Justin and Cliff, who are your favorite character in the series and why?
Hello, Strider Ingram. Welcome to the show. Goodbye, Daryl May. Have a great dinner. It's good to have you on the show tonight. And let me see. My favorite character in the Tales of Middle-earth.
Yeah.
Usually I'd go with Samwise. Samwise Gamgee is my favorite character every time. He is the entry point for the audience. He is the exit point for the audience. He is the everyman. And
I like Beaufort.
And he's really great. I love Samwise.
Beaufort is a key part of the team.
Yeah.
He knows. He goes a little overboard sometimes, especially in the movies. But he's always there, and he's always looking out for Bilbo.
Yes.
If you watch in the movies,
he's always the first person saying, "Where's Bilbo?"
He's always multiple times.
Yes, multiple times.
I wish they had paid that off in the final movie.
Yeah, I wish
where there was like one last "Where's Bilbo" heroic moment.
I know, I agree. Do you know what else is interesting? Hey, Dallas, how you doing? Pippin is yours and always will be. Yeah, your favorite character is Pippin. I have a soft spot for Treebeard, and I've got to admit that
Hannah.
What? I've always loved Barlaam Butterbur, the innkeeper at the Prancing Pony Inn. I've always had a soft spot because Barlaam Butterbur reminds me of, Fawlty Towers. Basil Fawlty running around trying to get everything for his guests in the hotel. I get such a Basil Fawlty kind of vibe off of Barlam and Butterbur, and I love how forgetful he is with giving the messages to Frodo, and is afraid that Gandalf is going to kick his ass.
Yeah.
It's so fun. I love that character. He's great.
As we close up, I just want to say that, as at the OneRing.net, we've put on many parties. We have a giant volunteer staff that helps us on the website. We've gotten to know many, many wonderful people from all walks of life, from all different countries. And I have to say that what I have found is that inside the Tolkien community, there are hard left and equally hard right fans, but everyone gets along famously because it's all under a shared love of Tolkien and his stories, and everybody reads what they need to into his stories. They take different lessons from Tolkien when they reread the stories at different times in life, and I think, making broad assumptions that Tolkien fandom are a bunch of left-leaning hippies, we've found it's actually wrong. There are leading members of this community that, are just as, have just as strong beliefs on the other side. But no one lets that get in the way. And if you go to our chat room, if you go to Barlaman's chat room, if you go to our message boards, there's always conversation. And even when someone tries to start a trolling conversation around politics, everyone knows how to have an intelligent conversation and wrap it up really nicely. So, again, another example of how this fandom is so different from many, many, many other fandoms. And
Indeed it is.
Just how universal it is. When can they watch us? They can watch us every Tuesday.
I agree, and that is such a nice healing place to be. And when you go back to, like when you went back to Thanksgiving dinner, y'all got to sit at the same table together and break bread together, whoever you voted for. So it's great that, the messages that we get from Tolkien and the Hobbits, and that quality of storytelling in Tolkien has always been able to transcend, and that's the key word, transcend, political slant, and actually talk about other truths, deeper truths, about hope versus despair, and death in the face of deathlessness, which are some of the biggest themes in The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So, it's really cool that we kind of dig these stories without all of us fighting.
Thank you,
what
Gloria.
What are you guys drinking? Thanks, Adam. We're just drinking the sparkling
Gloria
water.
shared the video. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in on Facebook, on Periscope, on Twitter, on theonering.net/live. We're here every Tuesday at 5 p.m.
We are.
We'd love to have conversations with you. If you're ever in L.A., come to Meltdown Comics in Hollywood. If you want to send us...
Thank you, Henrik.
Everyone asks around this time, can we send cards or whatever? I just have to say, send it to Meltdown Comics, Los Angeles, California, care of Cliff and Justin, care of the One Ring Net. We'll get it. Just make sure it's addressed, to us.
Yes.
Meltdown Comics in Hollywood.
7522 Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles.
You're just going to Google that address anyway.
90046. But now it's actually on the record. You guys, Deborah, it's Arianto, Vinmo, Sarah, Adam, all those nice people, Brittany. Everyone's saying thank you for doing the show.
Yes.
Thank you guys for coming to watch the show.
We do it because you keep watching.
We love doing this show. And guess what? As you can look at our archives on YouTube, and I do recommend you check them out, you're going to see all kinds of amazing people. I shocked my friends by showing them the video with Peter Lyon.
Yes.
The award-winning sword master who created all these beautiful handmade swords in The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. And we've got this interview with Peter Lyon. He was bouncing all the way over from New Zealand, came to visit us here in L.A. Oh my God, he was so gracious with his time. He was really cool. Loved having that talk with him.
So many conversations. You can go to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of them archived on our YouTube channel.
I'm going to pester Dominic to come in and just shoot
He's promoting his new movie.
I know.
It's on the Amazon.
I want him to come in here and shoot the shit with us next Tuesday.
Yeah.
I want to just, Dominic Monaghan, dude, at Dom's Wild Things on Twitter. All of you folks out there, everybody watching the show right now, go to Twitter and go send a nice message, a lovely, nice message, gently
To join us.
encouraging
He's been here
that
many
young lad.
times.
He's my narrator for my documentary, Ringer's Lord of the Fans.
That's right.
He is a big Ringer fan. He loves coming on the show, and he loves talking to you guys about all kinds of mischief. So I'm going to try to get Meriadoc himself. That's right.
And you can,
Mr. Brandybuck. I'm going to try to get
and
Dominic
if you
Monaghan.
ever have
Send
a
a tweet.
Tolkien question, text us at the phone number scrolling above 530-64-FRODO.
or
Just-
tweet us at the One Ring Net.
Just save that phone number and you can text us and Cliff will answer it anytime, day or night.
Oh, Eravandi is going to make us a dragon scarf.
Oh my gosh. It's
Oh, you're
so
such a
wonderful.
sweetheart.
Real
Eravandi,
Elvis
that's super
Dope.
sweet of you.
Everybody that's been watching, thank you so
So-
much. We'll
Oh, hey, Dallas is going to be in Los Angeles. He's sending me a message on Twitter. Dallas, so awesome.
Tuesday, 5 p.m. here.
Every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Join us next week, and we'll have some mischief, and maybe we'll surprise you with a special guest, or maybe not. We're going to have some more talk about Fantastic Beasts and where to find them, because I'm still interested in talking about J.K. Rowling and what she's doing with the Harry Potter verse, as well as any news that we're going to get on the J.R.R. Tolkien biography,
Movie.
the biography film called Middle Earth. We're looking into those details, and we'll bring that news to you right here on theonering.net. Follow me on QuickBeam2000, okay?
On Instagram.
On Instagram, and follow me on Twitter at QuickBeam2000, and follow him at Justin's Big Idea. Lots of love to you guys.
We'll
It's
see you next week.
So good to have you guys with us every week. We'll see you next time. Good show, buddy.
Good show.
Awesome show.
Yeah.
Tim and Eric, awesome show.
Tim and Eric. Are they?
Tim and Eric, awesome show. Great
God,
job.
They'd be wonderful.
Are we still on?
Yeah, we're still on.
Tim and Eric, awesome show. Great
Great job.
Such great. That stuff is sometimes it's unwatchable. They get gross. Sometimes they get really weird and gross.
Oh yeah,
on that show.
totally.
Oh hey, see, I got people following me already. That's awesome.
What? You got followers? No one's following me.
Right now.
I didn't get a notification.
All right, just happened just now. I love it.
Well,
Thank you.
how
guys are awesome.
annoying. I want new follows. I get fine, whatever.
Oh yeah, fabulous. That's nice.
Whatever.
Thank you, Care Bradley.
Wow, 2,000 people
sweet.
watched. So wonderful.
Big Mike's Boot Camp started following me 11 hours ago. Hunter Fox.
Stop the broadcast. Stop the broadcast. Stop the broadcast.
Oh, look at